Hello, everyone. I'm Elon Musk, and I'd like to share with you some of the fascinating moments I've witnessed in Washington. These experiences have shaped my perspective on policy and the future we're building together, and I'm excited to take you through them. The room is vibrating with the kind of tension that only appears when a political machine suddenly realizes it has swallowed one of its own. Phones are lighting up like warning beacons, aides are whispering too fast to sound confident, and Carolyn Leavitt is standing in the center of it all with that brittle stillness of someone trying to pretend their world isn't collapsing in real time. Every few seconds, the glow from her phone flares across her face again. Each notification a reminder that the ICE raids she has spent months glorifying are no longer an abstract talking point, but a wrecking ball smashing directly into her own family. Her polished composure is failing at the edges, tiny cracks forming in the way her fingers tighten, in the stiffness of her jaw, in the shallow breaths she keeps trying to disguise as professional calm. The irony settles over the space like humidity. Heavy, inescapable, and merciless. Around her, staffers attempt a performance of normalcy that fools no one. The word Louisiana slips from one aide's tongue, followed by detention and deportation, and suddenly no one knows where to look. Carolyn tries to straighten her blazer again, as if symmetry might change the fact that the mother of her 11-year-old nephew is sitting in ICE custody because Donald Trump needs to keep his base entertained with another episode of punitive theater. The same base that has spent years insisting these raids only hit other people is now watching this blow land in the most uncomfortable place possible, their own inner circles. The realization is settling like smoke, slowly but unmistakably choking the last remaining illusions. Cable news screens mounted across the hall are replaying Jessica Tarlov dismantling the fairy tale that Trump's immigration crusade is lowering crime or saving neighborhoods. Her voice cuts through the static, shredding the fantasy that ICE is some noble force for safety rather than a chaos unit empowered to storm communities in the name of political spectacle. But here, inside this building, denial is still being clung to like a flotation device. Phrases like routine enforcement and standard procedure are tossed into the air, hollow and weightless, unable to mask the obvious truth. The machinery Trump unleashed is swallowing people indiscriminately, and Carolyn's family is now proof of that in the most personal, painful way possible. The conversation shifts quickly, nervously, to the GoFundMe link circulating online. Boston, legal status, childhood arrival, detained. Each word lands heavier than the last. No one says it out loud, but the entire room understands what it means when even the insiders, even the loyalists, even the megaphones of Trump's harshest policies can't shield their own families from the fallout. The perfect storm is forming, made of policy cruelty, political hypocrisy, and the sharp realization that loyalty to Trump is not a shield, but a liability. Screens continue flashing clips of commentators calling the raids racist, unconstitutional, abusive. Mentions of Trump's Proud Boys cosplay patrols escalate the tension further. The contrast is searing. On one hand, MAGA rhetoric insisting that only illegals have anything to fear. On the other, a mother who entered the country as a child, lived her life quietly, followed every requirement, and still ends up in shackles under Trump's watch. The hypocrisy radiates like heat from a furnace. And while everyone here is scrambling to pretend this is just another day in Trump's America, the truth refuses to stay buried. The air grows thicker with each whispered update, each half-formed excuse, each attempt to dodge the fact that Trump's policies aren't just hurting faceless strangers, they're blowing holes through the lives of his own foot soldiers. And somewhere beneath all the frantic noise, one realization keeps rising from the floor like a pulse. This is only the first crack. Chaos is spreading through the building in quiet waves, the kind that expose every fragile seam in Trump's operation. Conversations are snapping into hushed fragments, aides darting from room to room with that frantic posture reserved for scandals they desperately hope won't reach the press, but already have. Across every screen, clips of pundits and lawmakers are playing on loop, and each segment slices deeper into the fiction that Trump's immigration dragnet is some noble crusade instead of a carelessly flung net ensnaring anyone unlucky enough to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Carolyn Leavitt's name is now threaded through the coverage, her connection to the detained mother already a headline flashing across chyrons with merciless repetition, Attempts to downplay the relationship crumble instantly under the weight of public perception, which never hesitates to connect dots when those dots expose hypocrisy. This blatant Jessica Tarlov's earlier demolition on Fox is still echoing across the scene, her voice slicing through Trump's inflated claims like a scalpel, dismantling the idea that ICE raids are turning the country into some utopian playground of lower crime and cheap rent. The absurdity of those claims is being replayed again and again. The shouting match, the cartoonish math, the smug insistence that deporting millions of people is a shortcut to economic bliss, and the contrast between that fantasy and the raw reality of Carolyn's family situation is growing sharper with every passing minute. The story is mutating from policy debate to personal consequence, and nothing exposes the rot in a political narrative faster than watching its architects get caught in the same machinery they insisted was harmless. Nearby, staffers are clutching printouts of statements that sound increasingly hollow as they read them out loud, stumbling over phrases like due process and law and order as if the words themselves are turning to dust in their mouths. The once firm facade of confidence is dissolving under the heat of a situation that refuses to be spun into a victory. And hovering above all of it is the unmistakable scent of panic, the kind that forms when a political narrative collapses faster than the team can rewrite it. Rumors are ricocheting off walls about internal debates, frantic calls to Louisiana, and whispered pleas to find out whether the detention can be reviewed, a word that means nothing in Trump's America unless the person in question has stock photos with him at Mar-a-Lago. The larger picture is tightening around them. Democrats calling ICE raids racist and abusive, activists flooding social media with stories of families torn apart, and lawmakers warning that Trump's self-appointed militias masquerading as federal agents are spiraling far beyond legal boundaries. Every new detail adds pressure to an already cracking wall. Mentions of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers being deployed under Trump's blessing only heighten the sense of chaos, painting a portrait of an administration that is less a governing body and more a wildfire fed by its own fumes. And through it all, the hypocrisy of Trump's protect our own rhetoric is becoming impossible to ignore. His circle might believe they are safe, insulated by loyalty and access, but the truth is unfolding right in front of them. No one is spared when the policy is built on cruelty rather than competence. Even the whispers about Trump's billionaire buddies, the only group he seems genuinely invested in shielding, are growing louder, floating through the hall like an indictment. The contrast sharpens. Those with wealth glide untouched, while ordinary people, including those adjacent to his own press secretary, are crushed without hesitation. The cracks in the narrative widen, exposing what was always there beneath the slogans and chants, a man governing by impulse, immune to the destruction he leaves behind, and a movement finally confronting the consequences of worshiping someone who cares only about himself. And as the staff scrambles to contain the fallout, one question hangs over the scene like a storm cloud forming, thick and heavy, refusing to dissipate. The ripple effect is spreading outward now, pushing past the walls of the building and into every newsroom, every studio panel, every corner of political media hungry for the next sign that Trump's carefully curated facade is cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. Clips of Jasmine Crockett are playing nonstop, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade as she calls out the sheer absurdity of Trump's immigration dragnet. Her words land with a force that makes even seasoned commentators flinch, exposing the truth that more than half the people detained have no criminal records at all, that they are neighbors and workers and contributors, not the cartoon villains Trump keeps inventing to keep his base fed on outrage. And as her speech builds, the contrast grows painfully obvious. While Democrats are shouting about humanity and constitutional rights, Trump's machine is busy insisting the raids are cleansing the streets of danger, even as evidence piles up that the only real danger is the chaos unleashed from the Oval Office. The atmosphere shifts again when the feed switches to activists and commentators calling ICE a racist, rogue agency empowered to operate as Trump's personal paramilitary unit. The accusation hits with brutal clarity, not because it is exaggerated, but because the pattern is undeniable. Armored vans in cities he publicly mocks, detentions in neighborhoods he labels hellholes, and a revolving door of agents eager to flex power with little oversight. The word thugs is tossed around repeatedly, not as hyperbole, but as a reflection of behavior caught on camera too many times to dismiss The commentary is searing, damning, and relentless, and as each new segment plays, the gap between Trump's heroic self-image and the wreckage of his decisions grows wider, more grotesque. Mentions of Tom Homan's cash-filled Cava bag are crawling back into the spotlight, reigniting a scandal Trump's inner circle hoped would stay buried under newer controversies. This time, lawmakers are calling for answers, demanding receipts, literally, and refusing to let the story die. The questions come rapid fire. Where is the money? Why was the case dropped? Who protected him? The silence from Trump's allies is deafening. It exposes a pattern too obvious to ignore. Corruption isn't just tolerated, it is curated, rewarded, woven into the fabric of the administration. And as that realization spreads, the public's patience thins in real time. Senator Adam Schiff appears next on the screens, calm but visibly disgusted, explaining how investigations normally work, how evidence should be handled, how oversight should function. The contrast between a measured explanation and the chaos swirling through the administration is almost comedic in its sharpness. Schiff's frustration builds as he recounts stonewalling, denials, and the breathtaking audacity of Trump officials who pretend ignorance when every indication points to deliberate obfuscation. His warning is clear. Without bipartisan oversight, corruption thrives unchecked. But Republicans are refusing to participate, protecting Trump at the expense of accountability, and that refusal is becoming its own scandal. Then comes the next blow. Reports that Trump is now urging the FBI to investigate lawmakers for reciting the law out loud, as if knowledge itself has become a threat to his authority. It's the kind of authoritarian impulse that would be laughable if it weren't real, if it weren't happening on camera with straight faces. The idea that stating constitutional facts could be treated as sedition isn't just absurd, it is dangerous. Revealing a president who panics at even the slightest hint of dissent and tries to weaponize institutions against critics because he lacks the competence to confront them through governance. The commentators call it intimidation. Schiff calls it absurd. Others call it alarming. And beneath every reaction is the same unmistakable truth. Trump's grip is tightening, not out of strength, but out of fear of losing control. The tension in the air keeps rising as anchors remind viewers to save emails, save texts, save every trace of communication evidence for the reckoning they insist is coming. The language shifts from commentary to quiet warning, the kind that vibrates with the certainty that every cover-up leaves a trail. And with each passing minute, the sense grows stronger. Trump's inner circle is not just complicit, they are entangled in a web of their own creation, one that is beginning to pull tight. And as the chatter intensifies, the narrative threads begin converging into a picture too vivid to deny. The narrative is tightening like a noose, pulling every loose thread of Trump's chaos into one suffocating tapestry, and each new update landing across the political landscape is deepening the sense that something structural is buckling under the pressure. The coverage now loops back to Carolyn Leavitt, the press office scrambling to assemble talking points that sound less like explanations and more like frantic attempts to distance her from a situation she cannot outrun. The details surrounding her nephew's mother are surfacing in waves: her long-term residency, her spotless record, her deferred action status maintained meticulously for years, and each fact contradicts Trump's exaggerated stories about violent criminals and infiltrating hordes. The contrast is so stark it practically stings. The administration's favorite talking head defender is now tethered by blood to the very group Trump paints as existential threats to the nation. And no matter how many times aides insist she hasn't spoken to the woman in years, the public knows proximity matters. Hypocrisy doesn't care about estrangement. The GoFundMe page becomes its own character in the unfolding drama, thousands of donors pooling money to fight a deportation that should never exist under any system claiming to value fairness or proportionality. The comments flooding that page read like a collective indictment of Trump's immigration crusade, exposing how ordinary citizens are now stepping in where the government is failing spectacularly. The phrasing used by the family, stable, honest life, doing the right thing, sounds like a direct rebuke to the propaganda machine that insists every undocumented person is a threat waiting to erupt. And as screenshots of the fundraiser circulate, the contrast between lived reality and Trump's nightly fear-mongering becomes impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the story of Trump's favoritism toward billionaires glides back into the conversation, reminding everyone that his definition of America narrows significantly when wealth begins to factor in. Analysts lay it out bluntly: the only people Trump protects consistently are the ones with deep pockets, beachfront estates, or private jets, leaving everyone else, supporters included, to suffer the consequences of policies crafted with arrogance rather than competence. It becomes clearer by the minute that Trump's promises of salvation were always conditional, tethered to class, status, and loyalty, not to any coherent political philosophy. And the growing realization that even his most devoted foot soldiers are expendable is reshaping the conversation in real time. Then comes the resurfacing of Carolyn's own unresolved debts and campaign finance messes, an embarrassing footnote that suddenly feels like a headline. Commentators start connecting her unpaid contracts and loans to a broader theme. Trump's universe is populated with people who mimic his behavior, copying his disregard for accountability as if it's a binding loyalty oath. The idea that corruption trickles down becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a clinical description of how his administration operates. The FEC being effectively paralyzed under Trump's watch serves as the punchline, a reminder that institutions designed to enforce honesty can be rendered useless when dismantled by those who fear oversight the most. And threading through all of this remains the increasingly uncomfortable scandal surrounding Tom Homan, his unreturned envelope of tens of thousands in cash, and the DOJ's conveniently abrupt decision to drop the case. Senators demanding answers are met with bureaucratic shrugs and deflective non-responses, not because the truth is elusive, but because the truth is damning. Schiff's insistence on transparency stands in stark contrast to Trump's signature dance of denial, intimidation, and misdirection. The pattern is so predictable, it borders on parody. A scandal surfaces, evidence points in one direction, and suddenly half the government forgets how to read subpoenas or operate within basic investigative procedure. As the investigative pressure mounts, the absurdity reaches its peak when Trump reportedly pushes the FBI to interrogate lawmakers for reciting the law in public, transforming ordinary civic discourse into something he once framed as sedition. The suggestion alone reveals the fragility beneath his bluster of president, so threatened by accuracy that he tries to criminalize it. Commentators begin describing the moment not as a lapse in judgment, but as a window into his governing philosophy: punish critics, reward loyalists, and weaponize federal power when political arguments become too difficult to win. The entire landscape is shifting under these revelations, turning what used to be dismissed as outrage politics into something both concrete and deeply unsettling. And as every screen continues glowing with updates, analysis, and unraveling narratives, the tension coalesces into a single unavoidable truth pressing heavily against the edge of the moment. The momentum is reaching a breaking point now, tightening into a single unavoidable collision between Trump's manufactured narrative and the reality spilling out on every platform, every broadcast, every whisper in the halls of government. The internal contradictions of his movement are no longer theoretical. They are manifesting as real-world consequences that even his most loyal defenders can't outrun. Carolyn Leavitt's situation becomes the emblem, a living demonstration of how the machinery she spends every day praising is indiscriminate, clumsy, and perfectly willing to devour anyone unfortunate enough to fall into its path. It's becoming harder for MAGA loyalists to pretend this is all part of some master plan when the plan is clearly malfunctioning, seizing, and grinding through the wrong people like a badly wired engine, sparking against its own frame. The press office is attempting to project confidence, but the strain is visible in the tightness of their voices and the way they repeat meaningless phrases, as if repetition alone can transform fiction into order. As commentators continue dissecting Trump's weaponization of federal agencies, a portrait of his governance sharpens into something unmistakably chaotic. The escalation of raids, the deployment of unaccountable paramilitary units, the silencing attempts against lawmakers, and the immunity granted to corrupt loyalists begin forming a pattern that even those previously committed to denial are being forced to acknowledge. Each revelation peels back another layer of dysfunction, revealing an administration running less on ideology and more on retaliatory impulse. The core of Trump's approach becomes clear: There is no strategy beyond survival, no principle beyond self-preservation, no loyalty beyond usefulness. And the people who once believed proximity to power would protect them are discovering they are nowhere near the center of his concern. Meanwhile, the expanding scrutiny around Tom Homan's bribery scandal injects a new level of desperation into Trump's defenders, who now find themselves deflecting questions they can't answer without incriminating the very system they helped uphold. Schiff's explanations ripple across broadcasts like cold water, reminding viewers how investigations are supposed to work, how evidence is supposed to be preserved, and how accountability is supposed to be enforced. His clarity is exposing something far more troubling than bureaucratic negligence, a deliberate breakdown of oversight engineered to protect those Trump favors and persecute those he targets. The contrast is so stark that even conservative outlets are struggling to reconcile their talking points with the increasingly unavoidable facts. Each attempt to minimize the scandal only heightens the perception that something far deeper and darker is being concealed. The FBI interviews with lawmakers loom over everything like a thundercloud, creating an atmosphere of quiet dread among those who recognize the danger of a president attempting to criminalize dissent. The notion that reciting legal statutes aloud could trigger an investigation underlines how fragile Trump's hold on legitimacy has become. His fear of being challenged is translating into reckless efforts to suppress anyone capable of exposing the cracks forming beneath him. Analysts on late-night panels say it openly now. The administration is not acting like a team confident in its authority. It is acting like a cornered animal lashing out. And with every act of overreach, Trump reveals how insecure he is, how desperate he is to maintain control, how deeply threatened he feels by the truth. Through the noise, the original spark, the detained mother in Louisiana, continues glowing at the center of the story, a reminder that these policies aren't abstractions, but human collisions with systems built to punish. Her case becomes symbolic not just because of her connection to Carolyn, but because it exposes the profound lie underlying Trump's rhetoric. He claims to be defending America, yet here is a woman who arrived as a child, built a life, raised a son, followed every rule available to her, and still ends up in a cage because Trump prefers theatrics over justice. The illusion that his movement is protecting Americans collapses when the victims are not villains, when the facts refuse to fit the script, when the consequences land on his own loyalists, and suddenly their silence becomes heavier, slower, more reluctant to continue. And as the story keeps expanding, tension building from every direction, the moment begins leaning toward a reckoning that no one here is prepared to confront.